Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel, and today we'll be talking about the first topic of the AFI ground training syllabus. It's called Techniques of Applied Instruction. So the AFI ground instruction will have a lot of ground topics that are supposed to be covered by your instructor who will be teaching you, and these topics will be a really good way to improve your instructional skills. They will help you become a better instructor. They will help you understand your students better, and they will help you adapt as an instructor to the various kinds of students that you will fly with. So one of the first topics that we are talking about, as I told, is techniques of applied instruction. Now, most of these topics are based on human performance, human behavior. So there are many different things that will be covered under each topic, and it's possible, very likely, that I might miss out on some of the things because there is so much to cover, but I have made points and I will try to make sure to cover up as much as possible in my video for this particular topic. Now, there is no specific way for going through the pattern of these topics. These are as per the DGCA syllabus as recommended in the three different places, and you can follow, you can read about any of these topics in any pattern. There's no specific pattern, but we will follow as per what the list states. So this is the first topic where we're talking about the different types of techniques that can be used to teach a particular student. It will talk about the problems that an instructor can face. It will talk about the problems of the student and how to come over those problems, how to make sure that the student is learning in a right and productive manner. So all the things that I'll be telling you today, they are mostly taken from the FAA Instructor's Handbook, and a lot of it has also been taken from my own instructor training, the things that I learned during my training, and from various different sources, many different notes, and from the feedback of many different senior instructors and other people who have done their instructional training. So it will be a good reference for you to read and to prepare for your interview, as well as to improve your skills as an instructor. So the very first crucial thing for instruction is that the instructor should be prepared. We don't want the student to think that the instructor is not prepared. We don't want the instructor to be sort of blank in the class. We want them to be prepared. We want the instructor should always be ready with their material, whatever they are going to present. And then there are different ways as to how you present the material, different ways on how the student is going to learn that particular material. So just like every student is different, every instructor is also different, but there are always ways that people can work on their own behavior even as an instructor, to make sure that the students learn in the best way possible. Some of the things that we'll talk about now is how the instructor should be qualified. That is the very most important thing. They should know how the instruments in the cockpit work, what are the avionics, what are the other things that are required in the cockpit, how to manage everything inside the aircraft. They should be aware of the flight instruments and all other aircraft systems that are there which need to be used. So only if an instructor is confident and qualified enough to work on all those things, then they will be able to teach with confidence to the students. So it's always good to have yourself updated on the latest instruments, on the latest systems that are there in your aircraft, and try to find out and learn as much as possible about those particular instruments inside your cockpit, so that you can teach your students better. Before flight, it's always good to have a pre-flight briefing, discuss about what the exercise will be, what all things will be covered, and the proper use of checklists, proper handover of controls. So we will be talking about a little bit in detail about some of these topics as well. These all come under the main topic, techniques of applied instruction. So all these things are sort of a combined training phase, where a thing which will be taught to you by your instructor who will do your patter training, and you will also it will help you become a better instructor overall. During the flight, prioritize the factor that we have: aviate, navigate, communicate. So first, always focus on flying the aircraft, then you focus on navigating, finding your position wherever you are, figuring out where to go and what all. And then the third will be communicate. So always try to prioritize that and instill the same procedures in the student as well, so that they can become better flyers. During the landing phase, try to go for stabilized approaches, maintain your proper speeds, maintain proper decision making for initiating go around procedures, and maintain your minimum safety limits as well. And try to teach your students to also have their own minimum safety standards, so that they can start making the decisions accordingly. So these are the three different phases that are there, before flight, during flight, and after flight, that you can focus on to improve the quality of training that the student gets, and the quality of training that you are giving from your end. Always remember, out of all these things, safety is of utmost importance. It is paramount. It is not something that can be compromised, not something that can be played around with. And uh, it's not recommended always to take risks, especially in the training phase, because you are teaching initial students who are flying for the first time in their life. And you want to instill good general professional behavior in those students, because they will look up to you as a role model. So the instructors are role models of the cadets. Whatever you do, they will look at it and they will follow that particular concept. They will learn from you, they will learn from your behavior, your way of professionalism, your way of dressing. So all these things affect a lot in the student's progress, the way a student will learn. Besides this basic overview, let's talk about the problems that an instructor can face. So first, one of the problems that an instructor might face is the material that they are going to present to the cadets. So the topic comes presentation of matter, how you are supposed to present that matter. Let's say you're teaching them about a particular exercise, let's say for example stalls. So you have to teach them not how to do a stall, but how to do a stall recovery. That is the main purpose. And then emphasize on the different types of stalls, what is the procedure, what are the call outs, the proper handover of control, and how you teach them in the cockpit. So there will be a few different ways also that we will be talking about now after this, where I will tell you how you teach a particular exercise to a student. The most important thing that you're doing here as an instructor is making an impression on the candidate, on the cadet. So that impression will only last with depending on a lot of other factors as well. So you have to make sure you put the proper impression, where the student is able to acknowledge whatever you're trying to teach, as well as retain that information. So a lot of it depends on your way of teaching as well as the student's willingness to learn. So we will talk about both these things as well. What matters over here is what follow-up measures you will take as an instructor to make sure that the student is retaining your impressions or whatever you have taught to them. So that also matters, how you frequently follow up with the students, how you get them to practice that particular exercise whatever you're teaching, and how then they are willing to behave or learn, or however it goes. So it's like many of the things will be sort of repetitive, and many of the things will talk about the same thing over and over again, but it's important to emphasize on how the particular things work. So there are many different small things, small techniques that are there, that instructors use every day in their lives without knowing what those particular techniques are. So that's what the ground training is all about. We will talk about all these things so that you are well prepared as an instructor. Let's talk about how to make impressions. So I'll just go over a few points that I have written here. So we have to make sure that the cadet is prepared to receive your impression. The cadet is willing to learn. He or she is in a state of comfort where they are willing to learn. So let's assess their physical comfort, their mental and emotional comfort. These are the two very main factors that affect the learning of a cadet. Physical comfort will be the needs of the cadet. So we'll talk about the needs as well. So physical needs will be such as food, sleep, a proper comfortable place to sit and study, right, and a proper clothing. So if either of these things are lacking somewhere, if they've not had proper food, they'll feel fatigued. If they've not had proper sleep, they will not be attentive in the class. If they don't have proper clothing, they will not be comfortable in the class, and they will not be able to focus more on what you're trying to teach. So all these things need to be taken care of when you are teaching a particular cadet as well. The next is a sense of security. So a student should feel secure and safe in the classroom, and not be in a state where they feel as if they're in danger. The third will be belongingness. So that is sort of like a need for affection. You have to connect with the students, you have to talk to them, make them feel as if they belong in the class and not make them feel left out. So make sure you communicate with every student that is there in the class. Then there is self esteem, which is basically the need to be recognized. So let's say there are 5 or 10 different cadets sitting in a class, and many different people want to answer, but you're not giving them the chance. So that will lower their self esteem because you're not recognizing them. So it's always important to make sure that you recognize many different cadets and give everybody a chance to speak, everybody a chance to communicate, so that they can be open with their queries, their doubts, their answers, and they will eventually gain confidence through this manner. The next and the last thing for need of cadet would be self realization. So that is the urge to be creative and expressive. So let's say somebody wants to talk about a new particular topic, or if they want to discuss their new experience which they might have had with another instructor or something like that. You should always let them open up about it. You should let them speak and communicate their own thoughts and their own imagination, so that they can understand whether what they're asking is correct or not, whether it gives them a sense of understanding that okay, my voice is being heard. It's something like that. So it's more based on human behavior, right? We talk about the problems that instructors face, we talk about students, and it's always a combination of both. The next thing we can talk about is the obstacles that a student can face in learning, the obstacles that are there to the learning of any particular cadet. So we can talk about these things, and I'll just go over the few points that I've made. So the first obstacle to learning would be a feeling of unfair treatment, right? So there can be 3 4 different things that specifically cause a feeling of unfair treatment to a student. I'll just talk about it. Unfair demand at performance. So let's say there is a particular cadet who's not performing consistently, or who's not performing, and then you give them an unreasonable demand of performance. Like you expect too much out of them. That will make them feel as if I'm being treated differently than the other cadets or something like that. It's more about the human behavior, right? The next thing is a bias. So let's say you create a bias in the academy, maybe unintentionally or maybe unknowingly, but the student can feel in it in such a manner where he or she might think that uh, that particular instructor has maybe those 3 favorite cadets, and he dislikes the other cadets, something like that. So try not to create a bias for the cadets. Teach them all of them in the same manner, in the same standards that you give out to everyone, so that they don't feel left out. They don't feel as if some people are being taught more than the others, some people are being included more than the others, right? There should always be a balance between the cadets. There could be quick learners, there could be fast learners, there could be very slow learners, but you have to make sure that you as an instructor are keeping things balanced for all the students together, so that nobody feels like an unfair treatment or a bias, or being left out. The third thing is the effort not being recognized. So let's say a student is not performing, but they're practicing on ground, they're making in the effort, they're doing their proper checks and everything on the ground in their books, continuously revising and trying to bring up their skills during flying. And you try, there's 2 ways to motivate them. One is a positive reinforcement, second is a negative reinforcement. So if you are not recognizing those efforts, if you are trying to demotivate them, or put them down, something like it's not something that you can do or something like that. If you try to do something like that, that will cause the students confidence to go down. So they will not be comfortable with their own skills, they will doubt themselves, which we don't want to happen. So these 3 things talk about the feeling of unfair treatment. The next thing, which is an obstacle to learning, will be impatience. So some of the students have this desire to have an early solo. Some of these students become very competitive, that okay, 3 of my friends from my batch got a solo, why am I not getting a solo? I will try my best. Some of the students will go and tell their instructor, sir, I did good today, please put me for a solo check tomorrow. So uh, a competitive attitude or behavior like this, or the impatience to actually let the flow of sorties go as per it is, will affect the students learning a lot. And this is something that I have seen even in students that I know myself. So it is common. These human factors might seem similar, but they're different, and they're very common in many of the cadets that we see. Even we as instructors have many issues with our teaching. There are things that we sometimes lapse on, sometimes we don't understand, sometimes we also make a mistake in ground briefings and in understanding the cadets. So that is something that we should continuously work on as instructors. And this kind of behavior, the impatient behavior in the student, can also hugely impact their learning process. So what impatience can cause is, student failure to learn the importance of the early stages of flying, right? And these early stages of flying are very crucial, because in the initial stages, after maybe 10, 15, 20 hours, you will be almost ready for solo. So that is a very crucial time, because eventually you will be flying alone in the aircraft, and you have to know all the procedures, you have to be confident with your choices, you have to be confident enough to handle the aircraft alone without an instructor, because it is very crucial, very risky as well. So the initial phases are occasionally difficult for the cadet. It will be slow, it will take time, it will be repetitive, but student has to have patience to understand why certain things are happening in that manner, why consistently repetitive sorties are being happening. So impatience is something that will cause a lag in that learning process. The next obstacle to learning will be lack of interest. Physical discomfort such as air sickness, or taking any medications, feeling drowsy, not having enough sleep, fatigue. So it's the same thing that we talked before. Apathy is basically something like lack of enthusiasm. So let's say an instructor wants to take a briefing, and if you're taking a briefing and you're not prepared for it, so you go to the class and you ask, okay, what is the thing that we covered last time? So the students might feel as if the instructor himself or herself is not prepared, and the student might lose interest in that particular topic. So how an instructor behaves, how an instructor gives the briefings and the debriefs, how the instructor teaches the particular topic, also affects the student learning massively. And the last thing, which is an obstacle to learning, is the anxiety of a cadet. So if they're very anxious, if they're worried all the time, if they're thinking too much, if they are not comfortable, and a lot of things run through their mind other than what is supposed to be done, then they will not be able to focus on what is happening in front of them. So these are a few obstacles to learning that are there for any particular student. Let's the next thing we'll talk about is the factors which affect an impression, or the way of teaching of an instructor. So again, some points. The first one is attention. So how much attention the student is giving, the instructor is giving. Whether the student is distracted by their phone, or some other cadets outside the classroom, or maybe something or the other outside the window, then they will not be attentive in the class. So the attention given by the student matters a lot for retaining that particular impression of a particular lesson. The next thing is vividness. So how creatively that particular lesson is being taught. The imagination, whether the student is able to correlate with what the instructor is teaching, whether they're able to understand, whether they're able to imagine that, okay, this is the particular scenario, these maneuvers are being carried out. So if they're able to imagine, then they'll be able to have a long lasting impression. The next thing is appealing. So if you're doing a presentation, is it just a normal presentation where you're just reading from the slides, or you're showing them different videos, you're being interactive, you're communicating with them, more like a cross questioning thing. So that makes a lot of difference. It should be more appealing to the students. The last two things which affect the impression will be teaching on topic. So making sure that the student is learning, the instructor is not going off topic. This instructor it's properly teaching on the specific topic that he or she is talking about. So that is very important. If you go off topic, that causes sort of like a halo error, A halo error is something that we'll talk about later on, but it's basically, misunderstanding between the instructor and the students. The students will not be learning enough. And the next thing is a variety in the way of teaching. So uh, let's say you take a class every time. How do you keep it interactive? How you keep changing your ways of teaching? Whether, some days you can do briefing with the students, some days you can do a presentation, some days you can show them a video, some days you can have the students do a group discussion amongst themselves. So the difference in the way of teaching, the methods of teaching will help keep the classes interesting. They will help build the impression much more for the students. Now we'll be talking about the demonstration performance method. It is one of the ways that instruction can take place, and it has four different stages. So the first is explanation, then demonstration, then student performance with instructor supervision, and then evaluation. So we'll talk about, a little bit in detail about all these four stages, and then we'll move on. So the first thing is explanation. The explanation is basically that, the instructor should be well prepared and organized. And if couple of maneuvers are being taught, so um, let's say if complex maneuvers, if difficult maneuvers are being taught, the instructor should be well prepared for it. Instructor should have proper briefings with himself or herself, and they should be knowing what they're teaching. So they should be well prepared for it. The next thing is student must be ready. So the student factors, the counted for the obstacles to learning, and student physical and mental comfort, all those things taken care of should be also there. Proper classroom with a comfortable sitting environment, with comfortable chairs, and an environment where the student can learn. The third thing is discussion of lesson objectives and required standards. So discussion of lesson, as in what particular topic will be covered, how will it be covered, what are the steps that need to be done to, do that particular maneuver, what are the precautions that need to be taken, what are the hazards that can, take place if a proper maneuver is not done. uh, Talking about the objectives, why we are learning that particular maneuver, and the required standard. So what is expected out of the student, so all these things need to be told to the student in the explanation phase. The next thing is student needs to know what they will learn and how they will learn it. So it's basically similar to the previous point. uh, what they need to learn is, which specific maneuver it is, how to do it, and how will they do it by themselves. The next thing is pre-flight briefing is a part of it. Detailed briefings on the exercises are important and should include the safety procedures. So most of the points are almost similar, talking about how pre-flight briefing is important, how that particular topic should be covered in detail beforehand, before you take them to the exercise. And then, what do you do during the flight, how do you do it, and post flight. So all the factors nearly talk about the same thing. So this entire portion talks about the first stage of the demonstration performance method, which is the explanation stage. The next is a demonstration. So basically in the demonstration, the instructor shows the student the entire procedure and all necessary steps. So you will show them the maneuver, you will give them the call outs, you will tell them what all things they need to monitor, where to look, how to do the maneuver, and everything. So it's basically a demonstration of your entire procedure. The next thing is student performance with supervision. So the student will perform the required action. uh, to learn, the student must practice. So if the student, let's say, performs it once or twice, that is okay, but they will eventually end up forgetting that particular maneuver. It's always good to, have the student practice a few times the same maneuver without the instructor assistance, just the instructor supervising, right? So that way the student retains the information much longer. The next thing is, by experience, student will reach the required standard. So the first time they do it, maybe they will have some, they will lack here and there, they will not be able to perform up to the standard the first time. Then the second time they'll try to improve, then the next time they'll try to improve, and keep on doing that same thing. So the more they practice, the more they experience, the more they will reach the required level of standard for that particular maneuver. The next thing is, instructor reviews and guides student on their performance, correcting for errors. So all this comes under the third section of the demonstration performance method. Student performs with instructor evaluation, right? So the instructor will see what errors the student is making. The instructor will guide the student on the same, and tell the student, okay, these are the things you need to focus on, these are the things that can be improved, and give the student a practice a few more times so that they become proficient at it. The last stage of demonstration performance method is evaluation. So instructor evaluates the performance, giving verbal advice on the progress, and try not to end the exercise on a negative note, because it leaves a bad impression on the candidate. The candidate, might feel uh, underconfident, or they might lose their confidence. So it's always better to focus on the things that have gone bad and try to give a positive outlook on how to improve them, rather than demotivating or putting down the student. So focus on the areas that need improvement. That is the end of it for the evaluation phase. So this basically is the basic demonstration performance method. And similar to something which is already a part of the demonstration performance method is the telling and doing technique. Okay, so I'll just briefly tell you what it is like. So instructor tells, instructor does. Student tells, instructor does. Student tells, student does. Student does, instructor evaluates. So basically the first time instructor showed everything and told the steps and everything. Then the next time the student will say the steps, instructor will do it. If something is wrong, the instructor will advise accordingly. The third time the instructor will not do anything, he will just see the student performance, student will do everything, student will tell everything. And the last time student will do everything, the instructor will evaluate. So this is basically the demonstration performance method. The next thing after the demonstration performance method is a positive exchange of controls. This is one of the very important and crucial steps that is there, because many accidents and incidents have occurred because of the confusion in who had control of the aircraft, right? And this especially happens during the critical phases of flight, during takeoffs, landings, and during the approach phase. So, and especially during certain maneuvers, when you're turning and doing certain maneuvers. So at that time, if there is not a positive exchange of controls, then it can lead to confusion, eventually ending up in an incident or an accident. So many accidents have occurred because of the misunderstanding or lack of communication regarding who had control of the aircraft. Pre-flight briefings for procedure of exchange of control. So an exchange of control is done in a very standard easy manner, where the instructor, let's say the instructor has control and he or she wants to give the controls to the cadet. So the instructor will say your controls, and the student will acknowledge by saying my controls, and the instructor will repeat the same thing, your controls. Where once the student has acknowledged that he or she has the controls, the instructor will leave all the controls altogether and hand it over to the cadet, making sure the cadet has acknowledged that the cadet has the controls. So it is always good to know who has control of the aircraft. That way the student will also be more confident. They will not feel as if the instructor is giving continuous inputs, and the student will build their own confidence. It is safer because we are aware of who is flying the aircraft, and if anything is required, immediately the instructor can take it over, right? And one thing to remember here is, when the instructor is giving the control to the cadet, it is always good to always guard the control. So the instructors should guard the controls at all times, not leave it altogether. You can leave it, but you can keep your hand on your feet within a reachable range, so that if anything goes wrong, you have immediate access to it, and immediately you can correct for it and take over the controls from the cadet. So it is always good to guard the controls, but always be aware of who has the controls of the aircraft while you are flying with the cadet. In techniques of applied instruction, there will be a few other things that we'll talk about. One is the sterile cockpit rule. So basically, crew should refrain from non-essential activities during the critical phases of flight, such as taxi, takeoff, landing, and all flights below 10,000. But since we are in the training phase, we'll always be flying below 10,000 feet. So non-essential things would essentially be like eating or reading a newspaper, or talking to the cadet about things which are not important, not relevant to the flight. So try to avoid these things during the training phase as an instructor. Try to avoid any non-essential things that are there which might act as a distraction. So we'll also talk about the use of distractions. And many accidents have been caused because of distracted pilots. So many accidents and incidents have happened because of this very same reason, where they did not have a sterile cockpit. They were talking about uh, irrelevant things during the critical phases of flight, causing the aircrafts to crash. And main aim is to reduce the distractions in flight. So uh, a sterile cockpit rule ensures that there are least amount of distractions. The next thing is use of distractions. So when pilots are distracted, that is when maximum accidents occur, right? Most enter spin or stalls when occupied with other tasks inside or outside the cockpit. So this was something that was also taught to us during our training phase as an instructor. The instructor would purposely distract the student to see whether they're able to handle the aircraft or not. So some of the examples I'll give you is, instructor should teach the student to divide the attention into different tasks, right? The different tasks could be something like, if you drop a pencil and you ask them to pick it up, so what happens during that time? The student might bend down to pick up the pencil, but they end up ending up into a spiral or a spin, or maybe into a very steep turn. This is very common. It even happens, it can even happen during cross countries, where the student is looking into the map too much and they forget to look outside and at the instruments, and they end up in a turn towards the left or the right, and which can further end up into a spiral or a spin. So it's always recommended that the instructors teach students how to manage the distractions, how to recognize the distractions, and how to avoid them. So you have to purposely use some distractions during the flight, and then teach the cadets how to manage them. So the other examples would be, determine position with the chart, then reset the clock, get something from the back seat. So while doing all these things, you can notice that the aircraft might deviate from its required path by itself, because unintentionally the student might move the control column or press on the rudder pedals or something like that, which will cause it to go away from its desired path. So it is always important in this particular aspect that the instructor should teach the student how to take responsibility in flight and how to recognize the distractions. So if an instructor is giving many distractions, the student has the right to say that, okay sir, this is a distraction that is affecting my um flight right now, so I will not follow up with it and I will fly the aircraft. So it's something that a student can do if it is affecting the safety of the aircraft, right? So they should recognize their relevance as a cadet, and how they should act on it, because eventually they'll end up as the PIC of the aircraft, as the pilot in command. So they have to be decisive on those particular things. The next thing is integrated flight instruction. Now this is one of the very important things that is there. It's very common, and nearly all instructors use all these techniques that we've talked about so far. So all this is supposed to be taught in your ground training. So this video will eventually be a really good follow up for your preparation for the interview, as well as to help you become a better instructor. So integrated flight instruction is where students are taught to perform both visually as well as with the use of instruments. So when you are teaching a student, you teach them with the visual references, as well as referencing those visual references with your instruments, to show them how it looks in the instruments. This is a combination when teaching cadets. By using visual references, cross check with the instruments, it is important because it helps the students understand how their aircraft is behaving. Some might not be able to understand everything visually. Sometimes the horizon might not be visible to a really good condition, and the student might get confused. So to build the perception of the cadet, we have to give them a reference of the instrument as well. It helps them build their confidence for further stages of flying, when they will start their instrument flying training. So they will have a constant scan, and this integrated flight instruction method also helps the students improve their standards. So it's not completely staring outside 100% all of the time. It's not completely staring 100% in the instruments. It's like a combination of both. So it's like 90% outside, maybe 10% in the instruments, just to scan and see whether your visual references are correct or not. So use of instruments is as important as feel of the aircraft. It is better, more accurate, and safer when students are monitoring their own and their aircraft performance. So they will get used to it. They will start using the correct power settings. They will start following up with the correct speeds, and they will be able to handle the aircraft much better when they are using a combination of these things, visual and with a reference to the instruments. One of the crucial things to remember in integrated flight instruction is to focus on the hazard of flying VFR into bad weather. So it's never recommended to fly VFR in bad weather. Even if you are referring to the instruments, try not to go during the bad weather time. It's not safe at all. So there are many accidents and incidents which have occurred because a VMC flight has gone into, a VFR flight has gone into IMC conditions. So try to avoid that particular scenario. Going further into the integrated flight instruction, it starts with the briefing on ground with the functions of the controls and the instruments, how the instruments function, and how the student can cross reference them with the visual references, and how the flight controls are working, and how will they be, how can the student read them in the instruments as well when they're flying visually. And it includes indications and outside references. So it's basically like you're flying visually but cross checking that visual reference with your instruments inside the cockpit. Students should be able to understand, using visual as well as instrument references, the controls will be similar regardless to whether they're flying visually or with instruments. So the control inputs, the maneuverability of the aircraft, the way the aircraft behaves will be similar whether they fly looking visually or with instruments. So they need to understand this when they do integrated flight instruction. The next thing is see and avoid. So basically, the student should always look out for the other traffic. So you have to instill this as an instructor into the candidate. You have to make sure that the student is always looking out for the traffic and they're not reliant, they don't depend too much on their instructor for looking out for traffic. So the student should always be, you can tell them, okay, show me where is the traffic. So they should be able to look outside and find out, okay, I can see the traffic there. So when they do this, they will build a habit of having a constant lookout by themselves rather than you telling them to look out for traffic. So when they go solo during their further stages of flying, they will be more situationally aware. The last thing that we'll talk about is the aeronautical decision making. So basically, to take best course of action to a given set of circumstances and situational awareness. So these are the things that we'll talk about in a little bit brief. Situational awareness is something, that you are aware of what is happening around you. You're aware of the other traffic, you're monitoring the RT, you're monitoring the other aircrafts, their positions, and your relevant position to the other aircrafts as well as to the field. So being situationally aware is being aware of everything that is happening around you and managing all of it together, right? So a good situational awareness will always help the cadet build their confidence, build their safety during flying. So it's very it improves their safety by a lot when they're more situationally aware. The decision making is basically, let's say you are simulating emergencies with the candidate, you're teaching them emergencies. So how they decide whether to put the flaps or not, how they decide to make an approach for the field. So all these factors are what ADM is all about, aeronautical decision making, how they decide their choices and whether those choices are correct or not. This will eventually develop with experience as well as the briefings, depending on the briefings that they've got. So it will improve their performance a lot. So if a student who's, for example, got a pre-flight briefing for any particular emergency, they will be well aware what to do when it's being simulated. Whereas a person who's been taken without a briefing, they will not be aware what to do and they will be completely blank during that particular time. So it will be a waste of that particular hour. So it's always beneficial that you teach in the best manner possible. You give out as much information as possible, but you have to also make sure that the candidate is willing to learn or not, whether they have the correct behavior, whether they have the willingness to learn. So all these things you have to also monitor as an instructor. So this is what overall the techniques of applied instruction are all about. In brief, we'll just go over all the topics again. So in techniques of flight instruction, in this video we've covered so far, the instructor being a role model for the candidates, the different phases of flight, during flight, pre-flight and post flight, what all things are there, what are the problems that an instructor might face, what are the factors that affect an impression, what are the obstacles to learning for a particular candidate. Then we have the demonstration performance method, the four stages of it, right? Explanation, demonstration, student performance with the instructor supervision and evaluation. And then we have the telling and doing technique, we have the positive exchange of controls, and we have the sterile cockpit rule, use of distractions, and we have integrated flight instruction, aeronautical decision making, and see and avoid. So all these topics, the subtopics become a part of techniques of applied instruction, and all these will be used as a combination during your time when you will teach as an instructor to any particular candidate. So I hope this video comes useful to you for your preparation of the interview, as well as for your understanding and to help you build, make yourself a better instructor. We will talk about the next topic of AFIR pattern as per the syllabus in the next video. And if you have any questions or any doubts, then you can just post it in the comments below.